Hello, everyone, and welcome to Friends of the Force, a Star Wars podcast. I'm your host, Brad.
And I'm your host, Sarah.
And on today's episode, we have a conversation with Andor Supervising sound editor Margit Pfeiffer, who worked on both seasons of Andor. We had the chance to talk with Margit at the Lucasfilm office alongside our friends over at Skytalkers and Talking Bay 94. And Sarah, I can speak for both of us in saying that we love and admire the heroes of Hollywood, the sound mixers, the sound editors, the re-recorders. They make the magic happen on a level that I will never understand, but a level that ultimately creates these beautiful pieces of art that we get to watch and hear and feel. And it was really special to have this interview.
Yeah, I've always been someone who has been interested in sound and loves sound, and I desperately want to see all of the sound folks in Hollywood. I want to see their boards. I want to see their computers. I want to see their software and how they put all of this together. Because it's such an incredible achievement and also a mystery to me at the same time. But this is such a fun and exciting interview because Margit is an incredible advocate for her own work and shares so much about the process that we may not know about in the process of this interview. And she is just such a wealth of knowledge and obviously a wealth of talent as well, that this was so much fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a little bit more context for Margit. She is a part of the ADR and Loop Group teams at Skywalker Sound. So the Loop Group, they're the group of people who create the landscape of sound for all the different extras, the crowd scenes, sometimes actors' dialogue. So we had the chance to watch episode 208 later in the LDAC Theater, which is probably the best example of their work throughout the season, because the Ghorman Massacre is such a technical achievement on a sound level with the different diegetic sounds, the Ghorman National Anthem. There's so much baked into that episode. So it was really cool to talk with Margit early in the day and then watch her and her team's work later at night. And also worth noting, her and her team were nominated for an Emmy in season 1, and they're hoping to get nominated for an Emmy in season 2 once again for sound editing for a comedy or a drama series. So they've been submitted for that category. We'll find out on July 15th, but fingers crossed they get nominated once again, and hopefully they pick up that award this time around.
Yeah, and before we jump into that interview, whether you are an Emmy voter or not, before or after this interview, go watch episode 208 again. Is it an easy episode to watch? Certainly not. But is it an incredible sound achievement? Heck yes. So without further ado, let's jump into our interview with Margit Pfeiffer.
We're so excited to talk with you today. So thanks so much. We were wondering, what are challenges of working within the Star Wars universe, which can have a very distinct sound and feel?
Well, the Star Wars universe has a long history since 1977, and so you want to honor that. You want to stay true to the original sound design of Ben Burtt and Matt Wood, and but you also want to innovate. So, of course, what does a TIE fighter sound like? It's been established, and you want to embellish it and improve upon it. Overall, Star Wars has a gritty kind of tonality, like the graphics in it too, the visuals, and you want to play within those kinds of perimeters. But when you get to go to a new planet, for example, we saw Ghorman for the first time, you can really innovate, and they can, we give it a new language, the Ghor language, which is based on French phonetics. And then some places where they're more established, you want to stick true to what has been done before. So on the Yavin Rebel base, I found out that all the air traffic controllers actually speak with American English accents. And so once you know that, you gotta honor that, and you keep going forward. And you have people on your team that are very familiar with this whole thing, and so you play with certain colors.
Andor Andor is your first Star Wars project, but it wasn't your first Gilroy family project. How does that change for you working with the same people, but then completely fantastical, different things? It's very different than, say, like Crawler or something in order to then achieve your job.
So I've worked with the Gilroys for 10 years. I started initially with John, where we worked on Pacific Rim, and then I did all of Danny's movies, and now it's Tony's wonderful Andor series. And you develop a shorthand. There's a level of trust and familiarity, but it's really about sharing a certain type of taste. I know when we look at a scene and someone says, XYZ, I can interpret it and run with it. And you do want to have, overlapping tastes and you develop a shorthand, so you're going to be faster and quicker in the execution. But it's really, taste and trust.
So as a supervising sound editor, I know you're part of the ADR and Loop Group. So what sort of people are on the team and where do you guys fit in the overall workflow to design the sound?
So the overall workflow, so I'm the supervising sound editor for the dialogue, ADR, and Loop Group side. And I had a wonderful, incredible dialogue editor with me, James Spencer, who really is a total gem and the best I've ever worked with, truly. And then I work obviously with the actors and the Loop Group and voice actors and all that. And then the overall team, so I focus on any human element, anything spoken, anything. Sometimes we design the vocals. Sometimes we, build out the crowds, like for the Ghorman massacre, for example, or the wedding or any of that. Sometimes we do specific elements. Sometimes we voice the aliens. Of course, I work with the actors, and if there's a line that needs to be replaced or is rewritten, or let's say you have a production sound with a rain machine, and you can't use the rain. Or not to the level it's on, so you will bring them back in the studio and recreate performances. And then in the overall thing, it fits in. The other department is sound design, and we have a wonderful supervising sound editor and sound designer, and he was also a re-recording mixer, David Acord. And so he had his whole team, a sound designer, a sound effects editor, there's Foley that they're shooting, their backgrounds they're cutting, they're designing all the cool spaceships and the aliens and everything, you dream of, all the fun stuff. And then he also mixes it. And so on the mix stage, we have close to final cut and close to the final visual effects, sometimes color time picture. The final music, where we had a placeholder before, a temp cue, is now replaced with the final version, the final recording, the final mix of that. And we balance all the elements. We do a pre-mix where we balance it for ourselves. And then there's Tony Gilroy and John Gilroy are in the room, one of our producers. And we weave in and out of the tapestry of sound and try to see, do we want to have a dialogue scene where, one speeches, for example, or any of the, where you lean in and you're really close up on the actor and their words. And then the next sequence, you have the TIE fighter escape in the beginning of episode 201. Well, of course, you want the effects, you want to feel the effects, and you want to balance that with the music. Who leads, who guides? How raw does it feel if we pull the music out? Where do we want it in there to give us the emotion and the theme of it all? And the same with the battle scenes and battle crowds and in the massacre. It's really always a trade-off. I have a lot of Loop Group and the production sounds chanting and singing, but you want to cut it interestingly enough for every place on the plaza, so where you are as the audience in this location, and it should sound different and interesting. If you have a wall of sound for 10 minutes, your ears are going to be tired, and it also doesn't work. So you want to start low and give yourself room to grow. So sometimes around the people, we focus on the sounds of the people. Sometimes you're on, you're on the explosions of the gunfire and the machinery, and you have the alarms going, and so you focus all on that, and the music carries you through. It, builds the overall arc and emotion in that scene. And then you weave in and out to keep it interesting, to punch the cuts. Do you want to hear the Imperials versus the rebels, the insurgents? And in this case, we also had the Ghor language, so that was very distinct. Someone would speak on the radio in English, very easy to identify where he belonged. And then you'd have the Ghor people trapped on the plaza realizing, oh my goodness, we're stuck, and all in Ghor and screaming in panic. And that keeps it interesting. So that's why you hand off and you trade. And oftentimes less is more. So you don't want to overload the audience and have, 10 minutes of screaming. No, that's not going to be good.
I would love to talk about Loop Group. Really, that's just the process of it, because that's like such a superpower. Like that's so the hidden secret of, I think, what makes a lot of that work. And I'd love to maybe what the process is like that. What, is it just like a couple of days that you just go through everything you would need with that team, or what was that like?
So we recorded as we also worked on the whole all of the seasons. We worked in blocks of 3. So we said, block 1 is the first 2-3 episodes, and then the next. And so you try to break it down instead of having 12 things going on at the same time. And so we did with Loop Group too. I'd cue it, and then we'd shoot for a day. And you don't want to burn out all the voice actors' voices, but I had a team of 16 people who are actors and voice actors and then sound supervisors all within their own right. And Matt Wood was so kind to run the session and also participate in it. And in this case, compared to usually, we shot it remotely because I was based in London for most of the series. And Matt is at Skywalker Sound, and the best voice actors live all around California. And, they're total wonderful pros. And so it's a pleasure to loop with them, and they're in their home studios. So we link in together. We have a little Zoom session. We see the images, and then they record on their own. And which works really great for separation of the individual microphones and tracks, but is a lot of work to cut together for chanting and singing in a fictional language. And sometimes they want to hear each other when they perform and riff off one another and when you try and build a certain conversation. And sometimes, they need to be isolated and sing on their own time. And it was great fun.
One of the things you talked about was those moments when to up the speaking, the dialogue versus the music. So how do you kind of decide that when you're looking at, the scene as a whole, the moments that it's better to have that dialogue come through, or the moments that it's better to really have the music soar?
Oftentimes you go by the script. You really want to support the story. So during Mon's speech, of course, I want to initially start with her and create an intimate moment. And the quiet moment I can build from. You build outward. And then you have once the senators start yelling and you have sort of an opposing force, and then it gets a little out of control and it gets more angry and hostile. And then we cut away to the different locations within the Senate. So we're in the hallway, in the cafe, in her driver's car. We want the continuity of her speech. And then sonically we separate it by putting different room treatments on it, reverbs and fuzzes on her voice. So again, you define the locations, and then we all go in the room with her again. And the intensity builds with the screaming crowd and Loop Group. And then we use some plugins to make, 16 people sound like 3,000. And as Mon exits into the hallway outside the Senate chamber, you still hear the booing. And so it really increases the urgency, the threat of leaving, or the threat to her. So she had to leave. And some of that is in the screenplay. Some of it you realize you need that in the moment. It could be quiet in that hallway. It wouldn't have the same impact.
Yeah. Similar to episode 9, like episode 8, Ghorman Massacre is such not only a technical achievement, but an emotional achievement. We go on such an emotional journey. It's episode. Can you talk about building tension with the sound and really making us feel on that journey and feel the true despair of that moment?
Yeah. And a lot of that is in the human element. So the despair really came in first. You have, first it starts off in that entire Ghorman Plaza. Initially, it's a peaceful protest, and you have some call outs and trying to convince people to support them. And then by the time you get to episode 8, from all the people around town are filling into this plaza from all directions. And it's still, people are unaware that this is a trap. So once they discover it's a trap, you have these panicked cries and call-outs. You realize, oh, this is serious. And as a human, while you do not speak that language, you feel the emotion in it. And it builds towards the end where you have the panic cries and screams and death grunts and battle yells, and then you add the sound design and music to it. So the sound design provides really the impacts, the explosions, the KX units coming in, some very hard hits, the shots, like people taking out. And the music rides the overall arc, the theme, and it keeps building and building. And when they go into the Ghorman anthem, it's heartbreaking. You know, it's like you know what's unfolding and you feel the despair.
I love that you brought up episode 8 because that, like, it's such a powerful moment, even though you don't understand what they're saying. And I'd be curious if that impacts your work at all when it's not in the English language or you're doing English and another language that people might not understand. Is that anything that you have to work through?
Sometimes, you know, in this scenario, Tony Gilroy had basically invented the language of 4 with the help of Marina Tindall. She was the dialect coach for Diego Luna on Rogue One. And so very early on, while we were still on season 1, it came down to, you know, we got to build a conlang, a fictional language that has actual meaning. The words have meaning, it's the grammar and the vocabulary, but we want French phonetics. And so it should sound like the melody of French to your ears, but it is not French. It's completely made up. And so shooting in something like that is a layer of, it's a little different. You want to make sure you have the sonic signature you want. And then Tony gave us, you know, 100+ lines for specific for group call-outs that we had translated. We got a little dialogue sample, and then certain sections where it said, you know, this is when they find out they're locked into the plaza. This is where they find out. So the storyline has to, if it's a really designed language, it has to fit. You know, all of it has meaning. So you gotta be careful with placement. You know, it's not random. Or in the town hall, initially when they had the town hall meeting, and you see, you know, some people screaming things forward to the screen that we might have added that weren't there, or to talk amongst each other in the crowd. And you want to honor that.
I feel like, you know, before season 2 aired, I feel like Tony Gilroy kept talking about how everything in the season was leading to Ghorman. Did it feel like that on the production side as well?
Yeah, and everything was leading to Ghorman. We actually initially started our second season sound post-production and sound mix with Ghorman. So we started, our first block was 204, 205, 206, and then 207, 208, 209. And so this is what we came right out of the gate with. Because you almost want to start with there's a shooting schedule and it worked out that way, but we dove right in. We addressed, for my department, the hardest thing right from the get-go. But it had already been discussed, you know, it had been a year in the making. We were feeding tracks to the Avid for the picture editor to approve and see how it all works together. I know they work on the music all along. I mean, so like everything gets molded as we go. And we all were aware that this is, the climax of the season we were in.
I'm sure you can tell Ghorman's top of mind for all of us. It's like the best of the seasons. It's so good. But in episode 8, we also get I call the Super Bowl for Star Wars, which is Cyril and Cassian this fighting it out in the cantina, and, you know, being part of the ADR group. Like, what was it like getting to work with those two? Do they come in, and like how do you get that emotion and that kind of intensity out of them for such a intimate and personal fight, you know, that we've been waiting for so long?
Yeah, it was a very gory, painful fight. And they were both great. You know, you try and salvage as much from production as you can. So we look for the best efforts recorded. And then as on the sound effects side, obviously everything is added later. The crunchy punches and the glass breaks and everything. And then I see within the track, we find out in our temp track, where are holes? Where do we need an extra little thing? You know, when the head is smashed against the glass, you want a special impact. So is it going to be sound design? Are you going to have a sort of a grunt performance? In this case, I would have Cassian do, you know, a take or two on it, and Cyril as well. And so you build out from there. You see what do you have that's wonderful, and then what can you embellish? And then, you know, the music comes in, and sometimes, you know, again, you trade off. It is more gory if it sounds like it hurts.
It sounded like it hurt.
Yeah. I don't want to be in that fog.
Yeah, Cyril took a few hits to the head, that's for sure.
Yes.
What about some differences between working on season 2 and season 1?
You know, season 2, the goal was always to go bigger and wider on everything. Like the set pieces were bigger. There was way more people in all these scenes and new locations. And And then the fictional language, we had a little bit of Aldani, some chanting in it, but that was, a smaller area. And then Gore stretched across 5 episodes and the little, clip up front early on. And so it just was bigger, faster, wider, more. And in a different type of, you dive into a new planet that we hadn't been to before. So it's a blank canvas for sound design and for all the voices, but also for the costumes and the production design. And so it's very fun.
Season 2 also has a lot of quiet moments.
Yeah.
Both, I'm even thinking just the hospital, especially, and then the antique shop, especially the final confrontation. Yeah. I'd be curious when you are editing around that and making sure that there are certain sounds that are punctuated, that are important, or the music leads up. How do you make sure that the script is doing its job, you're doing its job, the actors at their job? How do you make sure it's all balanced?
Well, in some quiet scenes, you really want to, there's multiple ways to go about it. I think you want to save as much of the production as you can, that's the ultimate goal. In the quiet scene, often there's no problem. You want to keep some of the little movements so it doesn't feel sterile, even though it's a very quiet scene. And then Tony often in the mix said, let us lean in, play it a little softer. And so the audience has to, just nudge a little closer in their whole experience of the show. And then you'd have, beautiful little moments of these little gears and everything turning, but you'd be very aware of it. There were very specific things you want to draw your eyes and ears to and not play the rest.
You mentioned Aldani and Ghorman, and just thinking about all these diegetic sounds in Andor. I think that's what it does the best. And you said blank canvas. So how much of a blank canvas are you getting, and what sort of instructions do you get to say, this is a type of world you're working with? And do you guys come up with sounds that maybe you weren't given that guidance on and something?
That's exactly how it works. Yeah. We'll go and early on read the screenplay, and it'll have, a little description of the scene, of what is the purpose, what are these people doing. And you go into it, and the then benefit of working with someone for 10 years is their taste. Mm-hmm. So you'll come in with your interpretation of what's on the page, and then we feed it to the avid early on to see, are we aligned on what we think it should be. And then you go from there. You take feedback. So if Tony or John or anyone has a strong opinion about something, you explore and you address it, and you try everything possible and to make it great. But it's always to serve the story. So it's really even for quiet moments, specific dialogue things. It's a story point. You really don't want to miss it. So we guide your attention to where it should be.
As the story progresses, it gets closer to Rogue. Is there anything sound-wise that, especially in that last block, you're purposefully laying crumbs towards so that it sounds more like Rogue One?
And for example, so for my department of voices, so K2SO, his voice has been established before, and so we use the same treatment, of course. Admiral Raddus, the alien voice was a specific voice, and so of course we used that voice. And over both seasons of Andor, you see the music shift a little bit. So as we go towards the end of season 2, it finally delves into the Star Wars iconic music and sounds a little bit. But it was a build. It was taking us from a very normal world now into the entire universe of science fiction.
Mm-hmm. I was going to ask, in the very early stages of looking at season 2, we've got these 3-episode arcs. Are there certain types of words that you're using to describe the places that you're going to kind of start to get your mind thinking about the overall soundscape for all of these arcs and all of these different planets that we're going to?
The thought is, of course, let's say you're on Coruscant, you wanted it's a wealthy place. So you look into that, you'll work with a more posh version of English. Mm-hmm. Versus you go to Yavin, it's more rough around the edges. And then you go to Chandrila, which hadn't been established. And then you go to Ghorman, and it's really clearly a distinctly different language. So it's actually an empty canvas in some regards. And so the first block, so episodes 201, 202, and 203, it's the the two rebel factions battling each other, but it's also the wedding on Chandrila. Yeah. So sonically, that gives you, it's already a juxtaposition. One is a jungle and one is a very elegant and historical, event. And so you think in those terms, you really immerse yourself. And then Ghorman was very clearly all about, to me, all about the language of war.
Yeah.
And then the last, block, the last few episodes really are the pathway into Road War.
You mentioned Chandrila. Can you talk a little bit about the process of designing the sounds that were distinct to Chandrila, this new planet that we'd never seen before?
That was a wide open canvas. It was mostly centered around, Mon Mothma's estate and having, also the little hike and all, but her estate and basically people from all galaxies arriving. And it was a very elegant event and steeped in, the history of the traditions. And so you take that into consideration and you go by a lot of what the visuals are. So the storyline is the wedding. And then what you see is, is a very wealthy environment and, the statue reveal and the gorgeous outfits and costumes and locations, the wedding ceremony, like all the way to the instruments you already see. So you try and what feels right in that moment is the right choice.
Yeah. There are so many moments in this season that us as fans regard so highly and I know, feel really strongly about and passionate about. Is there any piece of your work this season that was your favorite or you feel most proud of?
Many moments. But, it's really, truly some of the quiet speeches. I love Mon Mothma's speech in the Senate. It gives me goosebumps all the way to this day every time I see it. And she did such a great job. Genevieve did such a wonderful performance. All I had to do is, let it play. And the shooting in a fictional language was fun. It wasn't my first time ever, but it was the first to such an extent. So we really had all the cast members. We did ADR, we did Loop Group. And really 50% of that scene is what we added on to the production track and all the human elements and the moments of surprise and terror. And to do that in a language none of us speak, I thought was pretty fun. It's a good challenge.
Are there any challenges or learnings you had mentioned between season 1 and season 2, but did that inform, obviously, your season 2 work? Is there anything in season 1 that laid a good groundwork for you and your team as you then moved in?
Yeah. So you have some locations established. You have Luthen's gallery, and then you have some of the spaceships, and then the hideaway, and you have all these moments where you already know where to go and what to expect, and then Coruscant. We had been to Coruscant, and then you dive into new locations, and so some you take forward with you, and by season 2, what all the little notes are during a mix. We want this moment louder, we want to lean into the dialogue, and we want to feel the backgrounds a little more. We want to have more Foley for realism versus a designy element where we only want to focus on 1 or 2 sound signatures. And same with the music, it evolves. It's an evolution from season 1 onward. And we had a target. We knew where to go.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening to our roundtable with Margit Pfeiffer. Once again, a huge shout out to our friends over at Skytalkers and Talking Bay for tag teaming with us on this. And thank you to Lucasfilm for the opportunity. We'll have more in the coming days and weeks ahead, so make sure you're following us on our socials. And we'd also recommend checking out our other friends' coverage of their trips to Lucasfilm, including Star Wars Explained, Blast Points, Children of the Watch, and Triad of the Force. They got separate interviews. They are great people, so if you're not already following them, you should be. So definitely go check them out.
Absolutely. There's been so much here in all of these roundtables across both Group 1 and Group 2. And we hope that you've had the opportunity to listen to it all and get all of this great Andor conversation, because it is never truly and over. I have to give a special thank you to our patrons who help keep the lights on here at Friends of the Force. I know I say it every time, but I really, really do mean it. We're super, super grateful for your support. And a huge thank you as well to all of our listeners. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to listen with us, to join the conversation, to be a friend of the Force. I hope you are staying well, staying healthy, staying happy. And we are in turbulent times, but I hope you are taking care.
Absolutely. Thank you all once again for listening. And until next time, may the Force be with you always.